Hey guys, it's Makeshift, and today I'm going to show you how to do applique with your embroidery machine just like this. This means that you have an embroidery file that you can load into your machine to stitch the applique on for you instead of sewing it yourself with a sewing machine. And this is the third video in my applique series. The first one showed you how to pattern applique and showed you a few different ways that you can do that. And the second one covered designing applique in Embroidery, which is an embroidery program. And this video is going to show you how to go ahead and execute the applique with your embroidery machine. So again, at this point in the process, you already have a file that you've either received with your pattern or you've designed the file that contains the applique on your own in your embroidery program, and you're ready to begin stitching it out. So let's get started. So the first thing you have to do is hoop your fabric. You can do this either by floating it, which means not encompassing your fabric in the hoop itself, or you can hoop it like I did. And I purposely hooped it because as I showed in my previous video, my design is larger than my hoop. So just to keep the fabric nice and secure, I went ahead and hooped it instead of just floating it. And if you need advice on how to hoop your fabric, you can check out another video that I've made that I will link. At this point, we're assuming that you have your design that you want to applique, whether you've gotten it from a pattern that you've purchased or if you designed it yourself. And just really quickly, I had printed out my design that I had put into Embroidery, which has my center point, and I cut a piece of fabric larger than my overall pattern piece and marked the center here and hooped it that way. So my hoop does not have any water soluble stabilizer on top just yet, because with applique, first I want to do the basting stitch, and then I'm going to attach the fabric that is going to be appliqued on, and then I'm going to trim it up, and then I will put water soluble stabilizer on top. So we don't want to put it on first because we don't want to have a layer of stabilizer underneath our fabric that will be appliqued, and then you just are going to have to add another layer on top of that. So I'm going to go ahead and put this into my embroidery machine and get started. So all I've done here is run my basting stitch for my stripes, and I also went ahead and did the outline just so I know where my stripes need to stop. And this is just to save a little bit of extra fabric for the one that I'm going to be using for the stripes. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean up these jumps here. And now what I want to do is just take the fabric that I'm going to use for the stripes and cut some shapes to use for the applique. So I just take my fabric and lay it over the shape, and I don't, if I have a bunch of shapes together that like this that are all going to be the same color, I just cut out a large piece rather than try to do one piece for every stripe. Okay, so you don't want to cut it too close to where your stripes are going to go. You want to have plenty of wiggle room here so that you don't accidentally cut it too short and then you'll run out of fabric for your applique. Especially up here, this is where my design could not go past because my embroidery hoop is too small. So I just want to make sure that I have plenty up here to be able to finish that off by hand. So I'm just gonna kind of eyeball underneath here, lift the fabric up so I can see the line underneath and cut around. Okay, so that's going to be my first fabric piece for this top applique. for these stripes up here. And now I need a piece for down here. So just make sure that the pile of your minky is running the appropriate way. You don't want to have your stripes running one way and your body running another. So this is going to be good as long as I cut up here a little bit. And then there's a lot of extra down here, so I'm just going to trim this off. Okay, so that's going to be the applique for my stripes. And I'm going to cut out a piece for this tail area as well. And then we're going to go to our embroidery machine and tack this down with the second set of stitches. So I have my hoop attached into my embroidery machine, and now I'm ready to stitch this fabric down onto the body. So what I'm going to do is take my piece that I've cut out and place it over the stripes. I want to make sure that I have plenty of room around the stripes so that I'm not going to accidentally cut any of them short. So just double check from all sides that you have enough room, but make sure that your minky pile is running the right way. And then from here you need to go ahead and start your stitch that is going to actually tack this top fabric down onto the bottom. So for this, make sure you're using a matching thread, or I guess if you're purposely outlining your stripes in something that isn't matching, then that's fine too, but most of the time you're going to want to use a matching fabric. So I put the foot down, and when this stitches out, I try to make sure that the fabric doesn't shift just by holding it around the edges. It can also tend to bunch up a little bit while sewing, so I want to do my best to try and keep it nice and flat as the stitches are being made. But you have to be super careful about this because your hands might be getting a little close to the needle, so just be careful. Alright, so you can see all my stripes are now stitched into my fabric. So what I have to do from here is trim off all the extra fabric. But first I'm going to go ahead and do this other piece of applique that needs to be done, and then I will trim all of it up at the same time. So now I need to trim off all of this extra fabric around my stripes. And this is definitely the most tedious part of doing applique, and it tends to hurt my wrist after a while. So if you're doing a lot of applique, you might want to span it out over the course of a couple days. So I'm going to take some scissors. I'm going to use both my large fabric scissors as well as a pair of curved embroidery scissors to cut just around the edge of these stripes. So I'm going to start with my large scissors, and I'm going to grab the fabric with one of my hands and pull as I cut. So I'm going to pull away from the stitches, and this just helps you get as close as possible to this stitching line. So you want to be close, but at the same time you don't want to cut the stitching line, because then your stitches are going to come loose and the satin stitch might not catch the fabric. So I tend to just do one side at a time, and then I will flip the hoop and do the other side. Okay, I'm just going to demonstrate this with a couple of stripes because this is going to take a very long time. So now I'm going to take my curved embroidery scissors, which look like this. I got these on Amazon and they're really good. So this is just going to get nice and close to the edge here, right up to the stitch, to keep this edge nice and clean when we do the satin stitching. So we don't want any fabric to poke out beyond the satin stitching, and the cleaner you get these edges, the better it will look. So I just push towards the stripe as I cut. And I'm going to leave this extra fabric over here. It doesn't hurt anything to be there. It'll just be trimmed off when I cut out my full pattern piece. And when I have a stripe, I just make sure that I come and get this tip here, because that's one of the areas where the fabric will tend to poke out. Alright, so you can see how it's nice and clean around the stitch line. I'm definitely going to run a lint roller over this whole thing once I'm done to pick up all the little scraps, but I've trimmed the fabric nice and close to the stitch line so that when the satin stitch comes along, the fabric won't poke out beyond the satin stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these stripes and this little tail area, and then we can finish up. Alright, so my piece is all trimmed up. All the stripes are cut right to the stitching line. Everything's nice and clean. I took a lint roller and rolled off most of the remnants of the minky that was cut off. And so now I'm going to cut a piece of water-soluble stabilizer that is large enough to fit over this entire hoop, and then we're going to finish off this piece by doing the satin stitching over the top. Okay, so all my satin stitching is done, so now I just need to take my piece out of the hoop and take off the water-soluble stabilizer. Alright, thinking it looks pretty good. Let's check out our details here. So our applique looks good. It's nice and clean. Just have to get rid of any little fuzz left over All the fabric has been captured by the satin stitching, so you don't have any gaps here. There's going to be the couple areas where I need to go back and finish it by hand because my embroidery hoop wasn't large enough to do the whole piece, which is down there and up here. A couple areas where I'm going to need to come back in with my scissors and trim it closer to the satin stitch, so it just wasn't trimmed close enough to the stitch, but I can clean that up. So from here I would just need to finish marking my pattern piece and then cut it out, and I'll be all done. So hope you found this video useful and the whole series, and if you use any of these techniques, I'd love to see what you make with it. And thanks for watching. Bye bye.